Alexander and Joshua moved through the passage without stopping. They weren't heading in any particular direction anymore, just running, escaping. The news that Lara was alive had hit Alexander like a shot of adrenaline. He had to find her. He had to regroup and plan an attack. The passage ended at a large hole in the concrete ceiling. Alexander checked the Project Echo file in his pocket. A faint light shone down from the opening. It looked like they had reached ground level, probably somewhere deep in the forest. Gripping Lara's revolver, Alexander climbed out. He and Joshua found themselves in a derelict, half-finished house. A concrete structure with no windows, hidden in the heart of the woods. This was it. Bunker 4. The reflex laboratory from Lara's map. "We have to find Lara," Alexander said. Joshua looked around. "It's too quiet here, Dad. Way too quiet." He was right. It was a tense, unnerving silence. Alexander and Joshua moved through the empty corridors. The building was a bizarre concrete labyrinth. At the end of a long hallway, they heard a faint groan. It was Lara's voice. "Lara." Alexander moved forward cautiously. They found her in a small, dark room. Her hands and feet were bound tightly with rope to a chair. Her face was bruised, but she was alive. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" Lara asked, her voice weak. Alexander quickly pulled out the small knife he always carried for clock repairs and started cutting the ropes. "Subject 0 said you were still alive." Lara cursed under her breath. Those bastards from the Crow group were just keeping me for questioning. They thought I knew where Caroline hid the other tapes. As he sliced through the ropes on her wrists, Alexander said, "I have the tapes. We listened to the white one. Caroline was trying to shut down the 10.3 hertz frequency." Lara closed her eyes and sighed. "That frequency. The Crow group's goal is to control the people of Riverwood. With it, they can spread terror like a disease. Caroline found out that the frequency was connected to something called the hidden light. She explained that the hidden light was a supernatural phenomenon buried beneath Riverwood, a power that, according to legend, could alter reality itself. Project Echo, instead of just studying sound, had unintentionally awakened it. Now free, Lara limped toward the doorway. The group knows we have the tapes now, and more importantly, they know we've made it to this bunker." Just then, the sound of multiple footsteps echoed through the concrete halls. Not one person this time, but a group. "We're too late," Lara said, taking the revolver from Alexander's hand. "This is a trap. They were waiting for us." Suddenly, a tall man in a dark suit appeared at the end of the hallway. He wore no mask, but in his hand, he held a small metal box etched with the Crow symbol. 3 other large men stood behind him. The man in the suit gave a cold smile. "Alexander Matson, I'm glad you could join us. I'm just sorry it has to end so tragically." He wasn't mimicking a voice anymore. This was his own, dry, confident, and threatening. "Who are you people?" Alexander growled. "We are the people who run this town, and Caroline tried to ruin the game." The man held the metal box up slightly. "Give me the tapes, or I'll make you listen to the sound of your own son scream." Lara aimed the gun at him. "Don't come any closer, or I shoot." The man in the suit just shook his head. "That gun only has 3 bullets left, Lara. There are 4 of us." In that moment, Joshua reached for the cassette player they'd brought from the basement. He was going for the 10.3 hertz tape, but instead, his eyes locked onto the metal box in the man's hand. Joshua suddenly darted toward an overturned table, grabbed a shard of broken mirror, and ran back to the cassette player, holding the mirror in front of the machine. The man in the suit screamed, "Joshua, stop!" Alexander understood. Joshua was going to play the terror frequency. Lara fired the gun. The bullet hit the man in the shoulder. He cried out in pain. At the same time, Joshua slammed the play button, But it wasn't the 10.3 hertz frequency that played. It was just the ugly hiss of static. There was no sound, but the broken mirror reflected the room's dim light directly onto the metal box in the man's hand. The box began to flicker. A loud buzzing sound erupted from it, and suddenly, the box convulsed and exploded. A blinding white light filled the room. The hidden light that Lara had talked about had been released from the box, and it was now blasting into the faces of the Crow Group's men. They screamed. The light was burning them, searing them. Lara used the chaos to fire her last 2 bullets, taking down 2 more of the men. Alexander grabbed Joshua, and with Lara, they fled down the hallway running, as the sounds of agonizing screams faded behind them. They had defeated the frequency, but the danger wasn't over yet. Alexander, Lara, and Joshua fled the concrete building, disappearing into the forest. Behind them, the blinding white light from the explosion still illuminated the compound, the air thick with the smell of burning. The screams of the Crow Group slowly faded, as if the light itself had consumed them. What was that? Joshua asked, gasping for breath. The hidden light, Lara answered, clutching her shoulder. That box was the container they were using to amplify the frequency, to control the light. Joshua, you made it lose control. You turned it back on them. They plunged deeper into the woods. Now what? Alexander asked. Lara, recovering slightly, said, "We have to stop it, or it'll burn all of Riverwood. If it killed the Crow Group, it means its power is completely out of control." Alexander remembered Caroline's notebook, how she wrote that the hidden light was connected to an ancient power beneath the town. "The tunnels," Alexander said. "We have to go back to the tunnels from your basement. They have to lead to the center of town. Maybe the main source of the light is there." They made their way back to Lara's cabin, where the bloody body of Subject Zero still lay under the concrete rubble. The sight made Alexander shudder, but there was no time for emotion. They entered the network of old tunnels through the same hidden metal door. This time, they took a different path, one marked on the Project Echo map with a large circle. Frequency epicenter. After half an hour of walking in the dark, the passages grew wider, more formal. They seemed to be transitioning into an old, abandoned subway or underpass system. They arrived at a massive cavern. In the center, a huge, complex metal device hung suspended from ceiling, like an inverted antenna or tower. It pulsed with an eerie blue energy. "This is it," Lara said. "The main frequency amplifier." The Crow Group thought they were creating the frequency, but they were actually turning that light into a weapon. Just then, a heavy thud echoed from behind them. Alexander and Lara spun around. A figure stood in the mouth of the passage. It was the man in the suit, his face horribly burned by the light, but he was alive. He glared at them with pure hatred. In his hand was a sleek, semi-automatic rifle. "You're too late," the man snarled, his voice trembling with pain. "You released the light. Now I have to embrace it." He aimed the rifle at Alexander. "Give me the tapes. Caroline's last recording has to be activated here to regain control." Alexander knew if he handed over the tape, the man would regain control of the hidden light. He pulled out the Project Echo file and threw it at him. As the man was distracted, Alexander sprinted toward the amplifier. "Josh, stay with Lara." He reached the device. Its metal surface was hot, pulsing with blue energy. He knew he had to introduce an opposing frequency to destroy it, but how? He remembered the white cassette, the one Caroline had used to record the frequency that awakened the crow. It was an anti-frequency. Alexander quickly inspected the amplifier, a small slot, a port for cassette tape. The man in the suit threw the file aside and took aim at Alexander. "Your time is up, Madsen." Lara lunged at the man, tackling him. The sound of their struggle echoed through the cavern. In one swift motion, Alexander jammed the white cassette into the machine and slammed the play button. The sound of the 10.3 hertz frequency filled the space. The amplifier began to shudder violently. The blue light shifted to orange, then red. The counter frequency was reverting the hidden light from a weapon back to its raw, unstable state. An ear-splitting shriek erupted from the machine, not human, but the scream of an awakened energy. At that moment, the ground began to shake. Lara and the man in the suit grappled toward the edge of the cavern. The man kicked her, sending her over the side. Lara screamed as she fell into the darkness below. "No!" Alexander yelled. The man in the suit charged at Alexander. Alexander knew the only way to stop him was to overwhelm him with the frequency itself. In a desperate, final move, Alexander turned and wrapped his arms around the vibrating machine. The man in the suit slammed into him with full force, and together they were thrown into the core of the convulsing amplifier. With a deafening roar, the machine exploded. The red light intensified, and then, in one final white flash, it vanished. Silence. Absolute. Joshua, frozen in terror, was alone. The cavern was dark. His father, the man, and Lara were all gone. The silence in the cavern after the explosion was more terrifying than any sound. Joshua stood alone at the edge. Smoke and dust danced in the faint light filtering down from above. The amplifier was gone. Only scorched, smoking fragments of metal remained. Joshua crept toward the edge. "Dad," his voice echoed in the vast, empty space. No answer. Lara, still nothing. He couldn't believe it was all gone in an instant. No body, no sign, just emptiness, as if Alexander and the man in the suit, along with the hidden light, had been erased from reality itself. Joshua didn't cry. The shock had paralyzed every emotion. He had to save himself. He remembered the tunnels, the path back to the surface. He turned and ran. His only goal was to get out of that cold, dark tomb. The tunnels weren't threatening anymore. Now they were just an escape route. After a long journey, he found an exit in the basement of a derelict warehouse on the Riverwood docks. The sunlight, after so much darkness, was blinding. Joshua slowly climbed the wooden stairs and stepped into the abandoned building. He slipped through a broken hatch and found himself on the old pier. The town of Riverwood was cloaked in the morning mist, but it seemed calmer. Suddenly, Joshua heard a noise, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. He spun toward the sound. Lara. It was her, limping but alive. Her face was covered in grime, her clothes torn. She had fallen onto a ledge at the bottom of the cavern and had clawed her way through other passages to the docks. "Joshua!" Lara cried out, stumbling toward him. Joshua ran and threw his arms around her. "My daddy's." Joshua couldn't finish the sentence. Lara shook her head. "I know. The light took them. Alexander's work is done, Josh. He destroyed it. If he hadn't shut down that frequency, the whole town would be dead." Alexander's sacrifice hadn't just solved the mystery of his wife's death. It had saved the town. Lara put a hand on Joshua's shoulder. "What do we do now?" She gestured to the Project Echo file that Joshua was still clutching. "That file, all the names, all the proof, it's in there. If we take this to the police, no one will believe us. They'll think we're insane." Joshua looked down at the file. "It's enough to prove a secret group called the Crows existed, a horrific military experiment. But the light, the frequency," Lara said, "they can't process that. They'll just find another victim to pin it on, so they can close the case." Lara and Joshua stood in silence, staring out at the misty docks. They knew that if they told the truth, their lives would be in danger, and maybe another Crow group would rise from the ashes. Lara reached for the file. "Let's burn it, Josh. Let Riverwood have its peace. The truth is too ugly. Let Alexander be the last victim of that light." Joshua hesitated for a moment. This was all he had left of his father. But he remembered that Caroline and Alexander had both sacrificed themselves to protect him, to save the town. It was time to end the game. With trembling hands, Joshua pulled out every single page of the Project Echo file. He laid the papers on the dry pier and lit them on fire. The top secret file burned. All the secrets, all the names, all the fear, turning to ash. The smoke vanished into the morning fog. Now Caroline and Alexander can both rest in peace, Lara said, and so can Riverwood. Together, they started walking toward the town. Joshua knew he was the heir to a terrible secret, but he also knew that his father had bought him a future free from the 10.3 hertz frequency and the hidden light. In his heart, he spoke to his parents. Goodbye, and thank you. They disappeared into the mist. The story of the Forgotten Whispers was over. No one in Riverwood would ever know what happened that morning or how close they came to annihilation. Only the dust and the silence remained.
It's all about humanity. About humanity. About